Hey everybody, welcome to the latest Deck Tech. This one's a little bit special, so if you do like it, and if you're liking what we're doing here on YouTube, go down and hit subscribe. It really helps. Tell a friend. Share it even on your social medias. It would be a major help for us. But let's get into this week's Deck Tech. Okay, so what's the Deck Tech we're working on this week? Well,
This is Epic Experiment. You know Epic Experiment.
ooh.
Here's the spell. It's Epic Experiment X Blue Red Sorcery. Exile the top X cards of your library for each instant and sorcery card with converted mana cost X or less. You can cast it without paying for it, and you put the rest that weren't cast this way into your graveyard. So basically, it's a fun spell. Gotta build around it. And we have done this episode in the past. We've done an episode on this deck, but we're going to revisit it this time. Andy's been playing with this a bunch. You'll see it on the upcoming Battle of the Brews. Keep an eye out for that. And it's very cool. And you've updated it. We're going to give you that update now.
Yeah, so here's what's going on. So we've had requests for this in the past. We've also had requests for this very recently where people are like, can we revisit and look back at a deck that we've built and like what are the real life upgrades that you've made to it and are actually playing with it. And this is the first time we revisited a deck where we've taken it from a version that we brewed to a real life version that I actually play with in real life and have a bunch of experience with. So that's important to note, and is going to be hopefully makes this an interesting episode, even if you didn't listen to episode 99, which is Epic Experiment. Epic Experiment. Sean just read the card. We know what it does. It's going to dig us up. It's basically like Genesis Wave, but for instants and sorceries, right? It's like an Is It Genesis Wave kind of. Which we did this because we thought the card was so bad that we were doing burns on it, and then we were like, wait a second, this card looks pretty fun. So then we brewed it, and Sean and I were obsessed with this card for like the week before we went to our first GP Vegas, and then
Obsessed.
Yeah. And then
Obsessed.
I brewed it, and we were playing it on Forge on the plane to Vegas,
on the plane.
Yeah.
We couldn't stop thinking. We were about to go to Las Vegas
Yeah.
for the biggest Magic event of the year, and we couldn't stop. I mean, I guess it's appropriate. We're talking about Magic cards, but so crazy to me.
Couldn't stop it. And then we picked up, I actually bought cards there because I knew that I'd be able to probably get a decent deal on some cards that were a little expensive. But anyway, since then, people have been talking about what's the real deck look like. Well, luckily in the show notes here and on YouTube, you can find a link to the current deck list of that I'm running of Epic Experiment. And we're going to talk about how this deck works and what we've changed about it. So The first thing is, how does this deck play? Well, if you remember back on episode 99, we talked about that this is kind of like a glass cannon a little bit. You want to get a bunch of lands out, obviously, but we also don't want to run a ton of lands in our deck. So we've got a lot of cards that are pulling lands to our hand, 1-mana green spells. There's a whole host of them. We've got a bunch of them in here. They kind of replace lands. There's only 34 lands in this deck, which isn't exceptionally low, but it's definitely lower than we would have in any normal deck, I would think, especially one where you think you want a lot of land out for a big X spell, right? But that's the way it works. That's kind of the first game plan you have, and then getting your Epic Experiment, it's pretty much a no-brainer. You just cast this big thing, you tutor for it or something, and then you go. Now, I've played this deck a lot because it's fun, it's effective, it's powerful. I played it a lot in Vegas. It never lost in Vegas against a lot of other good decks. There's probably a few reasons for that. Other people brought way scarier looking decks and were teamed up on or something. Or some people listened to the show and they wanted to see the deck work a little bit. We'll see. That's definitely a possibility. But bring it back home and playing it, I've also experienced a fair amount of success with it. It has lost, of course. But it's a deck where it's surprisingly resilient and politics are very important. Because this deck likes to actually fly under the radar and then go off with this big thing. We obviously know about there's storm cards in here. There's just massive, crazy spells. Epic Experiment, of course, being the main one. But being resilient is key. The politics and flying under the radar is something you absolutely will have to do. And those 1-mana green draw a spell, a land to your hand, they really help with this under the radar idea. Especially if you bring it to a place like Vegas and you play it with a bunch of really tuned up decks, people are looking at those cards and they're like, what's that? Like, no one plays those cards at Commander.
Yes.
Those cards are not good. But they're very specific to this plan, and they work surprisingly well at doing the two things you want, which is thinning, getting you lands, and then the other thing of making it seem like your deck is nothing. The other thing I always bring up about this deck is that it's all basic lands except for like 2 or 3 lands, right? It's all basics. And that's another thing that puts people like, well, that's some budget deck. Like that's not going to be a real problem. But it often is. Yeah, so let's talk about some of the like storm cards first of all that we've played with. They're not actually storm. Oh, actually, no. First, let's talk about the commander. Sean, you want to read the commander for us here?
Oh yeah, the ultimate commander for this is Riku of 2 Reflections, 2 and Temur, 2 blue, red, green for a legendary wizard, 2/2. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, that's the majority of what we do. You can pay blue, red. If you do, copy it. If whenever another non-token creature enters your battlefield, you can pay green, blue, and make a token copy of that creature. Are there any creatures in this deck right now?
There are currently 6 creatures, yes.
6 non-token creatures. So that is an ability we could use, but we're mostly in here for the blue red.
Yeah.
And I've seen it before. Sometimes I've seen you cast Riku and just be like, oh, I'm just going to double up a ramp spell. And we keep saying ramp spells, but we don't always mean ramp spells. They don't always put lands into the battlefield. They often put lands into your hand, and you just consistently play land spells throughout the turn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's just about consistently hitting your mana drops, and it's less about ramping, oddly enough. It's a weird thing. And I think you and I both didn't know exactly how that was going to play out with the deck. Like, is it better to just go hard ramp like every other deck does, or is it more important to do this weird little thing that we thought of replacing lands with these 1 mana get a land in your hand things? And this 1 mana get a land in your hand has worked out surprisingly well.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend it for every deck. It's specifically this deck it works really well with, I think. And Riku is just, it's a bit of a no-brainer. It doubles up instants and sorceries. It's just something you definitely are loving to do. And another thing that's great about Riku that I found over playing this deck is it draws hate. Riku draws hate, which is like, that's okay. If people want to take out your Riku, that's fine. If they want to expend their resources doing that, Riku is pure gravy in this deck. It's pure bonus. I rarely even cast him more than like twice, I'd say. And if I even cast him once, it's because I kind of run out of other things to do. So don't get too caught up on Riku. Originally, the deck had, we'll talk about it in a sec, but it had Kaidel and Ludovic as its commanders for budget reasons, because we were still sticking to that $50 hard budget, which actually they're not bad. That's actually not a bad a team up as well.
Not bad at all.
No, not at all. Let's talk about some of the cards here that will help us win that are not just Epic Experiment. The first one is Sphinx Bone Wand. And if you remember back to episode 99, this was our number 1 star of the deck back then. And I think you could easily say it is still that, because it's just fantastic. It's a 7-mana artifact, and it says, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may put a charge counter on Sphinx Bone Wand. If you do, Sphinx Bone Wand deals damage equal to the number of charge counters on it to target creature or player. We had a big discussion.
We're casting a lot of instants and sorceries. This is a must answer.
Oh yeah.
This is a must answer card. Otherwise, like, it doesn't get long. Like, once it gets to 4 or 5 counters, it's just like, it's at 5.
Yeah.
If I cast 3 spells, I can do so much more damage too. I haven't done the math on it, but like,
it's wild.
Yeah, and it's wild.
It enables those little green cantrips and like the things like Preordain and Ponder and cards like that you have in this deck. It enables those to be actually game-winning cards at some point. So when we talk about being resilient, this is one of the things that allows us to be resilient. Someone can exile our Epic Experiment or exile a bunch of the bigger and flashier instants and sorceries in our deck, but Sphinx Bone Wand can win us the game without those cards. So
it does happen. I've seen it happen.
Yeah, it's
where Epic Experiment is long gone through counter spells or exiled even, and it's just like, well, it still does stuff.
That's one of the things that surprised me the most about this deck, actually, is that if Epic Experiment is gone, you can still win.
Another combo that works well with it, other ways, Metallurgic Summonings, 3 blue for an enchantment. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you make a construct that is XX, where X is that spell's CMC. And then the big money of the spell. Well, I mean, that's just one thing, but I mean, people are often drawn to 3 blue blue, but watching you play it, that doesn't always come into play. 3 blue blue, exile it, and return all instants and sorceries if you have 6 or more artifacts from your graveyard to your hand. But you probably, like, a lot of those are probably ramp spells, a lot of those are probably storm spells. You really only want Epic Experiment back if you need to, but there's better ways to do that. This is just to make a ton of creatures and storm out that way.
Yeah, I've never actually done that. I've never done the return all instants and sorceries thing with Metallurgic Summonings because it's such a threat, and you end up casting so many things that you even without, we're talking about without an Epic Experiment here. This card is really great, makes a ton of tokens. It'll either get removed or you just wander around because it makes creatures that you can kill people with.
And Aetherflux Reservoir, same deal.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So Aetherflux Reservoir, we had to talk about this before we started recording, but I've never won with this card. I've won with Metallurgic Summoning, creating a bunch of tokens, and I've won with Sphinx Bone 1. I've never won with Aetherflux Reservoir. But I was like, oh, this card's good because it does keep you alive, that resiliency again. You're casting spells, so you're gaining life. So even if people are attacking you, you're going to be gaining that life back and staying in the game. But you mentioned something that was interesting.
Yeah, so when you resolve an Aetherflux Reservoir, I mean, I don't know how you're going to win necessarily, like, card by card, but I know you're building towards an Epic Experiment, and I know you're intending on playing a lot of spells in one turn. I expect you to be able to 50 people before too long. Mm-hmm. So once I see an Aetherflux Reservoir, this is just true of anyone. If I see you put one of these down, I'm coming at you to keep your life total low. Even if I don't want to kill you right now or I'm incapable of it, I just want to chip away because you just can't let that get out of hand.
Yeah, and I think it's still it's still in the deck. I think it's still a great card in there, but there is something to be said about this card might draw too much hate. This card might make people attack you where there's a more of a negative return on it than the actual life you're gaining, which is bad. So you don't want to draw attention to yourself. You don't want people attacking you because guess what? There are no creatures in this deck. There's 6. They're not good blockers. It's very hard to repel like an aggressive deck coming at you. It's very, very difficult if someone decides to key on you. That's why you have to be pretty active in like deflecting any kind of hate that comes your way. But let's talk about some of the upgrades and some of the cuts we made in this deck from the original 99 version. Now you can go on our Tapped Out. You can find Tapped Out. Unfortunately, not great. Maybe we'll repost the direct link because I do have it here.
Yeah, we could do that.
We'll do that. We'll post both links. So you can go back. You can take a look at our original episode 99 version of the deck. And then we'll take a look at the current one so you can actually take a look at these. But some of the ones we just wanted to highlight. One of the big differences was cutting creatures. I believe there were 10 creatures in the original version of this deck. It's now down to 6. And in fact, talking about this and revisiting this, I know for sure I'm going to cut another one. So I'll just include these all together. So we got Trench Gorger, which is the 8 mana 6/6 with trample that pulls like all the lands out of your deck, and then it gets that big. We thought this might be a good win condition. It's a good deck thinning thing, and it certainly is those things. But one well-timed kill spell just hoses you too much, I think. So I actually never played with this card. I never included it. Although I remember meaning to in Vegas, and I just I think I got an extra turn spell instead of this. Gutter Snipe, 2 and a red for a 2/2. Whenever you cast instant sorcery, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. You end up winning all on one turn kind of in this deck usually, or at least taking people out. So Gutter Snipe is actually just not necessary, and it can also do that thing where, wait, this guy's going to cast a million instants or sorceries and kill me with Gutter Snipe? Like, I'm coming at you, I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to kill your Gutter Snipe. It just doesn't do enough. And then
you can't show them that.
And then oddly, Sean, you read this one. This one is like one of your pet cards
Devils.
anyways.
I love Charmbreaker Devils.
Yeah.
5 and a red. It's a 4/4 devil. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a random instant and sorcery from your graveyard back to your hand. Such value. Mm-hmm. And whenever you cast one, it gets +4/+0 until end of turn. That's huge. So I love it just for its getting spells back. That's an amazing thing to do. But like, if you storm out with a Charmbreaker Devils, if you have any way whatsoever of making it unblockable, that's a one-hit kill. No sweat.
Yeah, it's weird. This card's like, and if you listen to our show, you know this is basically an auto include whenever we do a deck like this. But in this, it's, while the bringing stuff back is nice, very nice, a lot of times you just want them in your graveyard, and the ability of getting +4/+0 when you cast things, I think it does you a disservice in the end, because you'll get your Charmbreaker Devils almost regularly to be like a 12/4. Like on every turn, you're going to cast at least one or two instants or sorceries, I think. So you're going to be able to get this guy up to be pretty big every turn. And if you keep doing that, people are like, I'm not going to let you live. You always have this 12 power creature coming at me, and that's not what you want to do in this deck. You don't want to incrementally kill someone. That's why Gutter Snipe isn't great, and I think that's why this card ends up not being that great. It draws a little too much attention. It's almost like I either have enough creatures to block and keep my board state like safe, or I have none, so no one thinks I'm a threat. So this deck definitely goes towards I have none. So yeah, we cut down the creatures in this one almost by half. And then by the end of this, we will have it in half, actually.
So what else did you end up cutting?
So another creature cut we had was one that I just very recently did, which was cutting Melek Izzet Paragon, which is a card that we all, as Commander players, would love to see work, and rarely ever does, I think. You rarely ever get as excited, or this card is as good as it looks. It's 6 mana, 4 blue-red for the 2/4 that says you can play the top card of your library revealed, and that you may cast the top card of your library if it's an instant or sorcery card. And then you double it if you cast it from the top of your library. Well, it's a nice thing to think about, but showing the top card of your library isn't good, obviously, but it really isn't good here because of the power level of some of the cards you have that you'll be able to double. Telegraphing that to everyone else and showing them what you have, especially if it's Epic Experiment, is not a good thing, actually. So while Melek can be powerful, I think Thousand Year Storm, which is the upgrade I made to it, might end up being better. This is like I said, very recent upgrade, so I don't actually know. I haven't played with this card yet, and it might just be too much, like win more kind of, almost in the same way Melek is. But at least it takes away that like you can only do it from the top card of your library, and you have to show it. You know what I mean? I think it's just basically a pretty strict upgrade to Melek.
I would hate to have to do the math on this if you resolved an Epic Experiment with a 1,000 Year Storm.
I know.
I would just that yeah, I just wouldn't like. I normally want to let a player have their fun. Like if someone is about to do their thing, I will never just like, okay, it's over, concede. Like I'll let us go through the motions because that's fun. This is one where I'm just like, listen, man, I can't
Yeah.
I can't help you figure this out.
Which is what I mean is like, this might be just way too much.
Maybe way too
It might
much.
be way too much, but it's probably going to make you win if it happens, or you're going to somehow deck yourself. That's also a possibility.
Yeah.
If you copy Epic Experiment too much and you just cast everything and throw everything in your graveyard. Ooh, man. But anyways, I think there's room for it. It's going to be fun to see if it ever happens. If I ever get to see it, it'll be great. These last two, why don't you read these last two that were cut, and I'll tell you what happened.
A couple of cuts. Hull Breach, red, green. It's a sorcery that lets you choose one. Destroy an artifact or an enchantment, or destroy target artifact and enchantment. Why wouldn't there Oh yeah, so yeah, I don't know why they wouldn't say choose one or both, but anyway, you have three choices: an artifact, an enchantment, or an artifact and an enchantment. And then Reality Shift, it's an instant, 1 and a blue. Exile target creature, its controller manifests the top card of his library, so they get to flip the top card and make it a 2/2 face down that they can flip up if it's a creature for their creature cost.
Which, by the way, this is one of the more underrated spells in Commander. This is an amazing removal spell for blue that it doesn't usually get this type of access. But really, why I cut both of those cards is because they don't really work towards your goal. Reality Shift can obviously take out like a troublesome creature, and Hull Breach does the same thing for instants and sorceries, for artifacts and enchantments. But you don't need to be worrying about that. You kind of want to let people don't look like you're dealing with threats. That's not what this deck does. It doesn't deal with threats. It just tries to exist while people are doing their thing, so they can do its thing first, hopefully. So they don't really help you do anything, but Primal Amulet does. Primal Amulet is one I put in there. It's the 4 mana artifact that says your instants and sorceries cost 1 generic less to cast, which is very helpful. And then when you cast an instant or sorcery, you put a charge counter on it. If there's 4, you flip it into Primal Wellspring, which then is a land that taps to add a mana of any color to your mana pool, and when mana is spent to cast an instant or sorcery, you copy the spell. So this is a lot better than even Melek and stuff, because it's going to make your stuff cheaper. You're going to be able to ramp a little bit more, or maybe even play one of those bigger instants or sorceries. like your blatant thieveries and things like that a little bit earlier, which will help you survive. And it's going to double things up when the time comes to really go nuts. So this is an amazing card to have in this deck. Yeah, I didn't include too many things that reduce the cost of spells. You'll notice, and that's true from the beginning, from episode 99. We didn't include a ton of them. I was a little worried about this one, but this one has so much upside that you're gonna be happy to get this at any stage of the game.
It's the only like spell copier I can think of off the top of my head that doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah.
Like all the other copiers require you to pay extra mana. In fact, this one gives you mana.
Yeah.
And that mana also copies it.
I think at one point I also had Pyromancer's Goggles in this deck, and I ended up taking it out because it does the same thing. But I noticed it's only red spells because you have to pay for the red, and it has to be a red spell. And there's not that many red spells in here. They're mostly blue, like the big ones that do really crazy stuff, right? So Primal Wellspring and slash Primal Amulet's really great. But now it's time to look at this deck that we brewed so long ago and take a look at some of the upgrades and decide, are there any neat moves?
Working on a neat move.
Well, luckily there are a few neat moves. One of the first ones I'll let Sean read. This is a change that we made, and where it was actually involving a creature, which is pretty rare for this deck.
Yeah, it's Anger, 3 and a red for an incarnation. It's 2/2 with haste, but we don't want it on the battlefield because as long as Anger is in your graveyard and in your heart, and you control a mountain, creatures you control have haste. What Andy has alluded to, where a lot of our strategies involve making a ton of creatures all at once, usually in token form, and we want to be able to attack that turn, so this is key. And if you'll recall, the way Epic Experiment works is everything that you hit that is not an instant or sorcery ends up in your graveyard. So we want to hit Anger with Epic Experiment because it goes right into the graveyard, fueling all of these creatures that we're going to make with our token storm spells.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a pinch, it's a little creature that can block once in a while, but this is a really neat thing to hit off of an Epic Experiment that you wouldn't expect is actually good to do so.
Yeah.
One of the other neat moves that we knew going into this, we talked about it in episode 99, but something I kind of rediscovered is that all the copy spells and all the things that let you copy spells obviously are insane with Epic Experiment, but they're also just really great on their own. So Reverberate does a double duty in this deck of copying an Epic Experiment if you want, copying something inside of an Epic Experiment if it's hit with one, but also if you just have one of your big spells, your Clone Legions and things like that, you can just reverberating that is really great sometimes. Like you said, you don't need Epic Experiment to win. And then there's also the one we always bring up, in that if anyone tries to counter your Epic Experiment, which is really the only way to deal with it, Reverberate will counter it right back.
Yep.
So that's a pretty neat little move there. And then Sean, read this first one, because this is a card that I know because of you, and I know how good it is because of you.
Oh, Perpetual Timepiece?
Yes.
Okay, Perpetual Timepiece is an artifact. It costs 2, and it has 2 abilities. Tap, put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. That's useful for anyone that wants to fill a graveyard. It costs you nothing but a tap to do so. And here's the key. 2, exile Perpetual Timepiece. Shuffle any number of target cards from your graveyard into your library. As we're churning through things so much, things are going to the graveyard. Epic Experiment puts a ton of stuff into the graveyard. There are games where you end up Epic Experimenting more than once because you have to do a little one at first. Or maybe someone just throws it in the graveyard anyway. This is a great way to put it back in. And just the bomby stuff, all your little ramp cards, you're going to leave those in your graveyard. You're just going to put the good stuff back in. So if you do hit, it's going to be good.
Yeah, and it's a great way to save so having a big graveyard in this deck is great for stuff like Seasons Past, right? For green, return any number of cards with different converted mana costs from your graveyard to your hand. and then you put this on the bottom of your library. This card is incredible. It always gets you like 7 or 8 cards if you have, if you're at the point where you have a pretty full graveyard. And even when you don't, it can get you like 3-4 cards back, which is amazing. So Seasons Pass is great, but the graveyard interaction in this deck is more than I ever thought it would be. You end up loving a Perpetual Timepiece really early, for all the reasons that Sean mentioned, the epic experimenting. There's other stuff like Rise from the Tides, things like that. Great card. Saving your graveyard from exile is also good with this card. That's something that it can do. Like you said, shuffling just the gas back in is it seems like it's like almost win more, but it actually it's part of that resiliency. It truly is. Like, and I didn't think that when we first built this deck. I thought that we were just planning for like an epic experiment and then another one. It's like, no, you're planning for thinning your deck the first half of the game. No one thinks you're doing, because you're just dirtling. You're not doing anything. But then it happens so fast that once people just realize you're a threat, it's too late. You're already at the point where you can do so many crazy things that they just can't stop you. And Perpetual Timepiece, oddly enough, is one of the first stepping stones towards that. We'll skip the next 2 here, and we'll just move on. We'll just move right into some of the neat moves that I've actually not been able to experience with this deck yet. There's a couple things in here that I don't know how good they are / how important they are, but they felt like we should mention them just because they're kind of holdovers. One I think is very good, and I would say keep, and the next one is I'm really wondering about if I should take it out of the deck. And I'll bring this up to the listeners because they're going to see it on the list and they're going to think about it. So the first one is Mizzix of the Ismagnus. 2 blue-red. It's the experience counter, legendary goblin. It's a 2/2. So whenever you're cast an instant or sorcery, you put you get an experience counter, and then instant sorceries cost less for each experience counter you have. So I remember us thinking that this would be good in the early game, obviously, even if you only get like 2 or 3 on it before it starts to really pay off. And I think that's still the case. I think this card's going to be great. I think it's going to be a bit of a lightning rod and draw a little bit of hate, but I think the positive outweighs the negative there. My only concern is that once it's gone, and that's it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's no real way to get this card back, or like it doesn't have a permanent effect on the game until you're ready to go off, but you need Mizzix to be there early if you're ready to go off. You know what I mean?
It's so hard. I don't have Mizzix in any deck where Mizzix isn't the commander.
Yeah.
I've tried, but again, I've cut it quick because it's like, well, I could cast Mizzix, but that's most of my turn. Mm-hmm. Maybe I can put 1 experience counter on her. Mm-hmm. And then it comes around to my turn again. It's like, oh, cool. I got a cheap spell and another really cheap spell. So now there's 3 counters on Mizzix. And then someone board wipes because they know what's up, or they just straight remove Mizzix. And they're like, well, since it's not my commander, I'll never get her back. So great. That was that saved me a couple of mana on a couple of ramp or draw spells. But is it maybe even better to just have, like, if you're going to replace her with another creature that does a similar thing, is it better to just have a Goblin Electromancer? Like, it's obviously less, but it's guaranteed to be the one that you want. It costs less to cast, and it's definitely not as threatening. Arguably, I think you're right. You cast Goblin Electromancer, you've saved 2 mana on Mizzix, and any other spells you cast this turn, as long as you cast 2 of them, you're saving an additional, like, it's already paid for itself if you can cast 2 more spells. Yeah, this might be a cut. And the problem is that I've actually never had this card in play, so I don't even know. I don't know. Now, is that because it's been in your hand and it's never been good to cast? That's a good clue. I can't remember that being the case. It is possible, but I can't remember ever looking at Mizzix and going like, I don't want to cast this. Right. I have had that with other cards, like Call the Skybreaker, which is the other one. 5 and 2, is it hybrid for the sorcery that says put a 5/5 blue and red elemental creature token with flying onto the battlefield, and it has retrace. So you can cast this card from your graveyard by discarding a land and paying its regular price, similar to Jumpstart, except you don't exile it. I remember you bringing up that maybe this card wasn't that great. Yeah, I mean, the retrace is the appeal, because there's going to be points, because we're putting so many lands into our hands as our strategy. We're going to have more lands than we know what to do with at times. Mm-hmm. But paying 7 is just too much. And I don't care. I don't really care to, like, storm into this. Like, as a storm target, it's not exciting. I think you're 100% right. And like I said,
I've never had it. I know I've hit it with an epic experiment. It's like, okay, great. I get 155, which isn't nothing, but it's also like not enough, like to either win or so it's one creature.
You got to get this, like with Mizzix, I can see how it would be good, because if you can get this down to costing 3 or 2 somehow, then it's like, cool, I'll just pop off a bunch of Skybreakers. But like, this isn't gonna.
Yeah.
It's usually only ever one.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think it's worth a cut.
Yeah.
Into what? We'll see. But we actually do have some ideas as to what may be able to come in and fill some of these gaps, because we're talking about
the last time when we talked about it before, Hour of Devastation was out, but that's it. No, I'm sorry.
Hour of Devastation hadn't even come out yet. Yeah,
that's right. So like we've got a whole standard plus Hour of Devastation to consider adding cards, and valuable reprints that have gotten much more affordable since then as well.
That's right. Why don't we talk about this? So this is kind of replacing our surprises and discoveries area, because we already know these cards, and there have been a few surprises. We've already basically talked about them all. So let's talk about some of these possible includes that we haven't talked about, and that I haven't even done to my, like I've included Thousand Year Storm as an upgrade, but I haven't included some of these other ones, and I've been thinking about them. Let's talk about this first one here.
Ooh, Scape Shift. Not a brand new card, but a reprint that made it much more affordable. It's it used to be like what, 30, 40?
Now it's like a lot, yeah.
Under 10. 2 green for a sorcery. Sacrifice any number of lands. Search your library for up to that many lands. Put them onto the battlefield, tapped, then shuffle your library. If our goal is to thin the deck, and we have 34 basics or whatever, I'm happy to sacrifice all of them and replace all of them with a better blend of colors, or just do our business. And then the beauty is you get to sacrifice any number of lands. So if for some reason we have all of our mountains out, that's cool. We don't have to sacrifice, like we don't have to go to 0 mountains. Like we can do however we want.
Yeah, I didn't even think of that. That's a great point. The fact that this came down in price means that it's more affordable for all of us. And this is exactly what you want to do. It's only 4 mana. That is the biggest thing for me with Scape Shift. It costs 4 to do this. I'd happily do this on turn 4. Like, it's worth it. If you epic experiment into this, it's fine. It's just another one of the things you hit with it. It's not. It just adds to your storm count. It's not a big deal. But even later, this is fine if you haven't done it yet, because again, the deck thinning, right? So I think this is one that I should include.
I think so too.
Another one that you brought up that I think I'm going to cut one of, I talked about I was going to cut one of our creatures. I think I'm going to cut our Chaomancer, which is a creature that just ETBs and gets you an instant or sorcery back, with the Mirari Conjecture. 4 and a blue for the enchantment. It's a saga. And the first one is return an instant. The step 2 is return a sorcery from your graveyard. And then the third one is you, until the end of turn, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you copy it. You can choose a new target. So another copy ability.
Other elusive free copy.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like this thing does 3 things that you really want, but essentially it's doing 2 things, in that it's getting some recursion going from our graveyard, which is something that we definitely love, definitely want to do. Even if you're just recurring some of those little like cantrip things, it's totally fine. Thinning your deck. And then that third one, you either want to time it out so that you get to cast something big that turn, or you're casting your Epic Experiment that turn. Even if, I'd argue that even if you're casting Epic Experiment for like 6, like X equals 6, which is I think this absolute smallest you'll ever want to do it, I think it's worth it if you're going to double it, right? So good one to include. I think this is I didn't even think of this when it came out for it, but I think it's good.
And I think it's good too. Like the drawback is that you're telegraphing things, right?
Yeah.
So like your opponents will watch the sagas tick up, and when it gets to 3, knowing what this deck does, they can fully expect an Epic Experiment and hold up counter magic. But we don't have to do it that way. We can just be like, okay, you know what? This Mirari Conjecture, like final saga chapter, is the one where I'm just going to do a lot of card draw and ramp and just set myself up for the future.
Yeah.
And then they're like, ugh. I waited for that and you didn't do what I was expecting, so now I got to change my plan because you changed your plan.
And not to mention that getting an instant back, there are counter spells in the deck. and they're essential. Actually, they're a very big part of the deck. You need to be able to
Oh,
protect your epic experiment, right?
yeah.
And I've
What your
yeah.
opponents will prepare.
Oh yeah, oh they absolutely will. Once they know what you're doing, they will. Yeah. So Moroi Conjecture gets you a counterspell back, which is great. With the instant, if it's in your graveyard, obviously. Next we have another one Sean mentioned here. This is a good one.
Ooh. I think this is an example. So this is mission briefing. Blue for an instant. What we call this is sort of like the spell version of what's his name? Snapcaster Mage.
Yeah.
Surveil 2, which is fine, but that's not the feature. Then choose an instant or sorcery in your graveyard. You may cast that card this turn. If it would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. So we may be living in a world where we have already put a storm card in our graveyard. So we're going to epic experiment, put a dozen spells on the stack, including this one, and this one will point to the storm card already in our graveyard before this adventure even started. And then at the end of all of those other things resolving, we get to cast that last storm card if we can figure out a way to get some mana from it, there are spells in there that untap all of our lands.
Yeah.
So then we can cast that storm spell after all the other spells have been cast to guarantee max storm count. And in a pinch, we can grab another counterspell with it. Anything in there that's instant speed.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff to be able to grab with this. Next one we have is Sunbird's Invocation. 5 and a red for the enchantment. It says whenever you cast a spell from your hand, reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is that spell's CMC. You may cast a card revealed this way with converted mana cost X or less without paying its mana cost, and put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This one's interesting because you never want to hit Epic Experiment with that trigger. But casting Epic Experiment into a Sunbird's Invocation is fine. But also so many of the other spells, hitting anything for free is also great. And like I said, Epic Experiment's the name of this deck. It's the only thing we ever talk about, but really you can win without it. And this would just be another way to hit big spells without having to worry about this one card, right? So it's not Magical Christmas Land. It's just the synergy is working together so well that there's also the question of, we don't want to include too many spells that aren't instants or sorceries, right? So we definitely want to keep our enchantment, artifact, and creature count as low as possible. So they really have to be really good. It took me a long time to put Primal Amulet in the deck. I just was worried about including another an artifact, a non-instant or sorcery, right? So they really has to pull its weight, and I think it's possible that Sunbird's Invocation is good enough to do that. I think it is.
Cool.
These other ones, like Moroi Conjecture, for sure, because especially since I'm definitely going to cut Archaeomancer to do it. Mission Briefing and Scapeshift are already instants or sorceries, and then Sunbird's Invocation, I think, might maybe pull out Mizzix and put this in.
Yeah.
Right? I think that might be worth it. Ooh, I'm excited. I had this deck and I've played it and it's fun and it's it does very well. I was at the point where I'm like, what am I ever going to include in this deck? I'm never going to make any changes, and now I've got a bunch of changes I want to make to it already.
Yeah,
it's so funny. So this is also something we get asked about a lot is budget. So it's time for the budget report. First of all,
yes, we're going to take all the cards, find out which ones count as for Storm and which ones go straight to the graveyard.
Okay, so yes, the budget report. So looking back at the old deck, of course, which we brewed for $50 or less. It's tough to tell what it was at the actual... Oh, no, I know. I actually do know what it was at the actual time. It was... Oh, yeah, it was $49.64.
Ooh, barely.
The most expensive cards at the time were Krufix at $6, Mystical Tutor at $5, and Kaidel at $2.75. Those were the three most expensive cards back then. I've since put I've put that deck as it was back then into current pricing, and it's gone up $18, up to $68. Which isn't as much. I thought it might increase more than that, actually. I'm kind of surprised at that level. But the three most expensive cards are still... Krufix is still expensive at currently sitting at around $8.50. so Krufix God of Horizons.
Couple bucks.
Yeah, a couple bucks. Increased a couple bucks, as the gods tend to do. No surprise there. The next one is Mizzix, actually. Mizzix has gone up to about $7. So that,
Okay.
and at the time she didn't even crack the top 3. And then still in the top 3 is Mystical Tutor, which is of course the tutor for an instant or sorcery, which back then we said we had to have, and I think it's just you still have to have it, right?
Yeah.
It's very important, and it's not that much. It's gone up to like $5, I think.
My favorite mystical tutor thing, and it's like if you see a window, this is what I don't want to see as your opponent. When we're all kind of mostly tapped, it's like, oh, I think this is safe. I'm gonna kind of tap out here, and then he's like, okay, end of your turn, perpetual timepiece, put 2 in the graveyard, spend 2, shuffle these key spells back in. Mystical Tutor, put Epic Experiment on top, and now I'll untap for my turn. And I'm just like, no.
Yeah, that's a neat move, right? Like, there you go. Yeah. And it's you think that this deck is so straightforward, but it really isn't. It's so fun in the way that it works, and it oddly, like, I guess it's not super interactive, but at least, it's fun. It's fun to do. Anyways, but the current deck pricing, what do we have here?
Okay.
It is $177. So that's my version of the deck that we brewed in real life.
So what's the difference? About $100.
About $100, yeah. About $100. Obviously, at the time it was 50, so it's a bit more. But yeah, $68 versus $177 is reasonable, but still like not super expensive, right? Like this is still a budget deck by just about everyone's standards, I would say.
Yes.
It's under
most
$200.
of the lands are basics. Half the value is in 7 cards. So like, what do we got? 180. It's about $90 in 7 cards.
Yeah.
And the most expensive card that Andy is currently running is Expropriate. 7 blue sorcery, and then everyone votes. You vote for time to take an extra turn, and then everyone else can vote time or money. Time means Andy takes an extra turn, or money means Andy takes anything of yours of his choice. Obviously, as the caster, you don't pick money because you're not going to control your own stuff. You already do. So like it's a free turn plus a blatant thievery, basically. You get one thing from everybody, and they're fools to give you an extra turn beyond that. Like that's the best choice.
Yeah, this is blatant thievery stapled onto an extra turn card, right? Like that's what this card ends up being. That's what it should be every time anyone casts it. Never give them extra turns. Although once in a while you get somebody who gives you an extra turn, which is a big mistake, especially with this deck.
But that's only if they have a piece on their board that's like, well, that will lock you in for the win.
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah.
Like if I let you pick this, you will certainly win. At least if I only give you another extra turn, maybe you won't win.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to choose either way. But this card's $25. This card, of course, very popular commander card. Some people say too much, too good.
It is too good. Like when an expropriate is resolved against you, it does feel like the game is over, and we're like basically.
It's the one like positive thing for the game is that you do have to exile expropriate after it's done, so there's no recurring it or anything like that. So there's no shenanigans in that way. Although you certainly can't double it if that's a thing that's happening, which is possible. Anyways, expropriate. Really great card, $25. Oof. Anyways, the second most, I didn't get this at $25. I remember buying this when like right after it came out. It was like $10 or $12 or something.
Yeah, it started at like $12.
Yeah. The next most expensive card is a card that definitely wasn't this much and is a topic of much discussion in the Commander community. It's Cyclonic Rift. We all know Cyclonic Rift. It's the card that overloads for 6 and a blue to return all your opponent's stuff to their hand. Non-lands, of course. This card is, I mean, I remember when including this, I had a couple copies because Modern Masters, whatever version of Modern Masters reprinted it, came out. So I picked them up at like a couple bucks. What a laugh. Now it's like $18 for this card.
Yeah, I don't think it's ever been this high.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, you know, obviously it's an amazing commander card. There's not much we need to say about it. It's really good.
It's worth all the money, but I want to say up to this point, I think the first two cards we mentioned are cuttable in the deck, right? Obviously, they're incredible. Obviously, they do amazing things, but like, I don't mind saving a cool almost $50 by like dropping those two cards. Any other like overpriced take an extra turn card works well in that one, and Cyclonic Rift is a unique effect, that's why it's so expensive, you can't replace it. But I honestly feel like I don't really care if I epic experiment into it. It protects me early game, but like I can find another card that protects me early game. Propaganda.
Epic experimenting in a Cyclonic Rift is just not good. You return one thing, you can't do the overload for it. So
right.
So it is only in there to protect you early game, and then it can also, like, you can cast it after you've got a board of tokens or something, and then that will obviously help you win as well.
Sure.
The third most expensive card is
Temporal Mastery. Yeah, 5 blue. This is a sorcery with Miracle. Take an extra turn after this one. I think it's expensive because there's a Miracles deck in. Is it also Modern, or is it just Vintage or Legacy? I forget.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert in those old school expensive formats, but it's a very important card in that deck because you can Miracle it for 1 and a blue, but it normally costs 7. We don't care about that big expense. We're probably going to do it mostly for that, but trade it in for a cheaper Time Walk.
Yeah, there are cheaper ones now, right? There are cheaper things that do this, especially since you also need to exile this at the end. There are some where you don't need to exile them and they sit in your graveyard, and those are crazy.
Oh my goodness. What, that new Crux of Fate?
Yeah, you shuffle it back in. It's like, ooh, that's
no,
good.
not Crux of Fate. What's it called?
No, that's
something of Fate.
Nexus of Fate?
Nexus of Fate. That's the one. Nexus of Fate, the controversial buy a box M19.
Yeah.
Same price. Gets shuffled into its owner's library. I would argue for the same price, this is way better in our deck because it gets shuffled back in.
Yeah, it can be, but that miracle cost is pretty sweet. If you ever miracle this, which I have a couple of times actually, it just ends up being the card you draw that turn. It's like, yeah, sure, I'll miracle. That it just gets you that step closer to epic experimenting and winning. It's great. The extra turn cards ended up being a major change that I made to this deck. I included a few of them that weren't in the original deck list, and they have proven to be well worth it. Like that's almost like, it's like that's kind of the way you win a lot of times. It's like, okay, I've epic experimented into 2 extra turns, so I just cast all these things, I make a bunch of tokens, I do something where I do something with my graveyard and make a bunch of things, and then I end up doing it again. It's just like, yeah, the extra turns will win you the game. Not to telegraph it too much, but yeah, the 3 stars of the deck are coming up, and there you'll see what we're talking about. But budget wise, yeah, Sean, what you mentioned is very interesting. Expropriate, $25. Cyclonic Rift, you can cut $50 out of the deck. Yes, I would never tell anyone to go buy Expropriate for $25, even though it is really good, or Cyclonic Rift for $20. That being said, having them in there is like Cyclonic Rift, I would argue more for like try and keep it as much as you like. If you have them, include them. If you really want one, yes. Expropriate, you're right. Blatant Thievery, Temporal Mastery, these cards do similar things. It's definitely replaceable. Cyclonic Rift does such double duty in that sometimes it wins you the game and sometimes it totally allows you to stay in a game you shouldn't be. That I think it's worth it. Anyways, let's go to the 3 stars. Let's take a look at what, looking back on this version of the deck, what are the 3 best cards? At number 3, this doesn't even make total sense, but it's so hard to pick, honestly, because so many different cards do so many different things at different points in the game, and it's honestly really difficult. You could put Sphinx Bone Wand still up there. You could put, obviously, Epic Experiment. We didn't include it for this because it's like the card. But sometimes just the tutor is what you want. Sometimes, just a thing that gets stuff back from your graveyard is the key card that wins you the game. So it's tough to say, but I've found that if you cast Blatant Thievery, and of course, you got to mention Expropriate just because it does essentially the same thing and is just kind of better. But we've already talked about that card. Let's talk about Blatant Thievery for a second. It's 4 blue, sorcery for each opponent. Gain control of target permanent that player controls. This card, and of course Expropriate, is very, very good because this allows you to have a board. And sometimes it's the most it's always going to be the most powerful stuff on the board. But sometimes it's a board of stuff that will win you the game. I've had
Yeah.
it where Blatant Thievery has got me the pieces from my opponent's boards where it's like, oh, I don't even need to do the other thing I was going to do now. I can just win with these pieces, which is incredible, right? And obviously, again, expropriate lets you then take an extra turn after it, basically. So that's bonkers. But Blatant Thievery in and of itself, I did want to mention, especially in the 3 stars here, because it does what you want it to do. Whether you hit it off an Epic Experiment or not, it's a great card.
Yeah. And then the final star of the deck that any... No, not I'm wrong about that one. Second star, Rise from the Tides, 5 and a blue sorcery. Put a zombie onto the battlefield tapped for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. This is partially why the extra turns are key for this kind of deck, because even if we get anger in our graveyard, we don't get to attack with these zombies right away. But, you know, if you're in the middle of building, this is a fine one. It only costs 6, and we'll usually get 6 or 7 zombies on it easily.
Yeah.
And that is a significant board that, you know, it'll provide a lot of defense, and you actually, if you decide to start coming at someone, that does a lot of damage.
Oftentimes, this is the first card I'll return back to my hand after I have my graveyard pretty full.
Yeah.
Because you cast it, you get it back, you cast it, you've got 12, 13 zombies or something, and then it's just like, well, the other stuff I'm going to do will also help me win. And this is kind of the thing I was talking about. You kind of all win all at once. It's like you rise from the tides. Everyone's like, oh my God, I got to deal with this guy's board. And they'll expend resources to deal with the board, but then you're just free to do the other things you were going to do anyways with the spells and all that kind of stuff. So it's almost like a distraction, but can also win you. It's great. And finally, I just included Walk the Eons here as a kind of a placeholder of all the things that give you extra turns, because they are just so undeniably powerful that, you know, we don't need to go too deep on it. But Walk the Eons is one that is 4 blue. It has buyback of sacrificing 3 islands, and you can, give someone an extra turn. So I've never done the buyback. You don't need to. You rarely need to. You'd almost rather have the lands out a lot of the times. There are certainly times where you would do the buyback. I'm not saying you'll never do it. I'm just saying, like, a lot of times you're like, okay, I'm just fine with casting this and putting it in the graveyard, and then I'll get it back a different way. You know what I mean?
If you cast an Epic Experiment and you hit this and anything that untaps all your lands, you would absolutely buy it back.
Yeah.
So that you can untap the lands and play it again. Now you'd need 5 islands, because you're gonna sacrifice 3 and you need to get the 2. Oh no, but if you stack it the right way, you can tap them, put the mana in your mana pool, then sacrifice them. Yeah.
There's a lot of things. And so to end out this episode of revisiting this big deck that we talk about a lot and people always bring up as being really fun, and they build their own versions of it and all that kind of stuff. To end this, it's like, how do you play this deck? I'm not going to go so deep into it, but I just wanted to say before we leave here that this is a combo deck. Whether you like it or not, it's definitely a combo, even though it is kind of one turn or one card that creates a combo. And it gets very triggers are all over the place. The stack gets filled with cards. It's nuts.
It gets complicated.
Right. It gets very complicated. So I would suggest that if you're going to play this deck and you're going to have this deck on your own, before you bring it out into the wild, to run it a couple times in a program like Forge or any other thing that you do. Or if you have the physical deck, try doing it a couple times literally on your own, just so that you're used to how you want to stack the spells, because that is very important. And you don't want to be looking at a card like your stack full of 20 things you're going to cast and then be like, like, you got to know, okay, move all the ramp spells here. I'll do these later. The draw spells go here. This is where the extra turns go, blah, 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 blah. Like, know that stuff so that you can resolve it quickly, because it's otherwise it's kind, you do feel kind of like a burden on your play group. And it's happened to me before. Sometimes I feel like, oh God, like I'm not prepared for this. I like, that's kind of, I feel rude. You know what I mean? Like,
I made a little flashcard that kind of put the general, like, the first thing to resolve are the ramp spells, because they increase your storm count and they don't really do much otherwise. If you have a copy, it goes here. If you have a thing, it goes here. If you have counter spells, they can counter the ramp spells, because you don't need those, but you want to cast them for storm.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much to talk about. This episode's already pretty long, but like, we could go in depth, but jump in the Discord. Get on our Patreon, jump in our Discord. Let's talk Epic Experiment. Let's talk any of these other decks you want to revisit. We're happy to do it. It's fun, especially the ones we've built in real life. Those are the most fun because we have actual experience playing them and stuff. So
yeah.
but this has been great. Know the deck before going into it. I would say that's just one major piece of advice I would give anyone wanting to play this deck. Yeah. But that's it. That's it for this week. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
We'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Big thanks to all our patrons who make these episodes possible.
Yeah, and if you want to check out more comedy videos, check out our Brews News playlist.
Make sure you follow us on Twitch TV to see when we play live.
If you want to chat with us, head over to Twitter. We're at Commanders Brew.
And please hit subscribe to ding the bell and find out when we got new stuff coming out.
See you next time.
Bye.